I used to wonder what it felt like to be erased, to be crossed out like a typo in front of hundreds of people while everyone just watched. 3 months ago, at the Belmont Hotel downtown, I found out. I was sitting at table 18. It was the absolute worst spot in the entire ballroom, jammed right against the service door to the kitchen. The air smelled like old lobster broth, and every time a waiter rushed past, it threw a cold draft down my neck. There was no name card for me. At a retirement gala, with over 200 of Boston's top academics, politicians, and philanthropists, I was a ghost. And the man everyone was there to celebrate was my own father. Dr. Jonathan Wheeler stood behind the podium, the heavy university crest catching the light. He had been a legendary professor there for 35 years. Leaning into the microphone, his deep voice filled the room as he announced he was handing over full control of the $6.2 million Wheeler Education Legacy Trust to my stepbrother, Garrett. He raised an expensive crystal glass, looked out across the sea of glittering chandeliers, and said words that cut straight through me. Only the children who make us proud truly belong to us. The room erupted in applause. And right then, looking past all the wealthy donors in the front rows, his eyes locked onto me sitting in the shadows. "You can leave now," he said. My legs were shaking, but I stood up. And that is when my husband, Daniel, stood up right next to me. What happened over the next 60 seconds completely shattered the elite world Jonathan Wheeler had spent decades building. But to understand how we got there, we have to go back 3 weeks. It didn't start at the hotel. It started on a rainy Tuesday evening around 7:45. I was sitting at our oak kitchen table grading spelling tests for my third graders when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Victoria, my stepmother. "Isabel, your father's retirement gala is set for October 14th at 7. The Belmont Ballroom. Black tie. He expects the family to be there. No, please join us. No, we'd love to see you. Just a cold demand." I stared at the screen for a full minute. Across the table, Daniel looked up from his laptop. He always notices when I go quiet. "What is it?" he asked. I handed him the phone. He read it, his expression completely flat. That is just how Daniel is. He doesn't react impulsively. He observes, analyzes, and plans. "Your father didn't call you himself," Daniel said quietly. "No," I replied, swallowing the familiar bitterness. My father and I hadn't spoken in 4 months. The last time was Easter dinner, where he spent the entire evening talking about Garrett's Ivy League law degrees and his bright future on Wall Street, while I sat 3 seats away, like a piece of background furniture. Daniel closed his laptop. "Do you want to go?" he asked. He didn't ask if I should go, or what I thought was right. Just, "Do you want to?" Honestly, part of me always wants to believe this could be an olive branch, I admitted. A chance to fix things. Daniel didn't say anything, just watched me with those calm, steady eyes. But the other part of me knows Victoria is just checking a box so she can tell her friends she invited me. It's a performance. "So, which part of you wins?" he asked. I looked back at the text. The Belmont was where the university held its biggest fundraising events. "I want to go," I said, even though it felt like setting myself up to get hurt. "I know better, but I still want to be there." Daniel nodded. "All right, then we're going." Later that night, I noticed Daniel on a long phone call that lasted until midnight. His office door was shut, but I could hear his low voice using the tone he only uses for serious business. When he finally came to bed, I asked if it was a work issue. Something like that, he said softly. Go to sleep, Isabel. Over the next week, Daniel became intensely focused. I caught him printing documents late at night, highlighting spreadsheets, and scribbling notes in the small leather book he uses for corporate meetings. One evening, I passed his office and saw a logo flash on his screen for the EduBridge Foundation. The name meant nothing to me. What's that? I asked, leaning against the doorframe. He casually closed the laptop, not looking guilty, just thoroughly organized. Just doing some background research, he said. For what? To understand exactly who is going to be in that room, he replied, his gaze incredibly sharp. Who holds the actual leverage and who doesn't? I thought he was just being protective, trying to make sure I didn't feel out of place around all those high society academics. I had absolutely no idea he was preparing for a war. 4 days before the event, Victoria called. An actual phone call, not a text. That should have been my first warning sign. Isabel, dear, just making sure you're coming. Her voice had that elegant, freezing quality I'd learned to recognize as a threat wrapped in silk. Yes, Daniel and I will be there. Oh, wonderful, she said. I wasn't sure if you'd feel comfortable, given the crowd. Board members, major donors, even someone from the governor's office. But I'm sure you'll manage just fine. In her language, that meant you don't belong here, and I can't wait to watch you squirm. I'm sure it will be a lovely evening, I replied evenly. Garrett will be sitting with your father at table 3. Right next to the podium, she continued. It's a massive night for him. I waited for her to mention my seat, but she stayed quiet. Where are Daniel and I sitting? I finally asked. Oh, we'll find a spot for you, dear. Don't worry about that. Just enjoy the evening. Her tone made it clear I was an afterthought, an extra body to be shoved into a corner. Victoria, I'd really like to know the arrangement ahead of time. Goodness, I have another call coming in. See you Saturday. Remember, black tie, elegant. There will be press photographers. Goodbye. The line went dead, leaving me in the kitchen with that old, sickening feeling of being incredibly small. 10 minutes later, Daniel found me. What did she say? He asked. Garrett is at table 3 and we are somewhere else. Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. It was a tiny movement, but I knew it meant he understood the insult I hadn't spelled out. Do you need me with you on this? He asked. His tone wasn't just a husband agreeing to attend a party. It was an offer of total support. Yes, I said. I need you there. Then I will be there, he replied, taking my hand. That night, I heard him on the phone again. This time, I couldn't help but listen through the crack in the door. I need you to confirm his attendance, Daniel was saying. Yes, Dr. Brennan, the board chairman. I want to know exactly which table he's at. No, don't contact the university directly. Go through the regular foundation channels. I stepped back quickly before he saw me. I should have asked questions, but I was too overwhelmed by the anxiety of the upcoming night. To understand why that gala mattered so much to me, why I went even knowing it would hurt, you have to understand my family. I had 2 mothers. My birth mother, Sarah Wheeler, passed away when I was 4, so my memories of her are just fragments. I remember a bedtime story, the faint scent of lavender, and a laugh that sounded like wind chimes. That is what the neighbors told me later, at least, and I tried to make myself believe it. I only have one photo of her. We are at a park, Sarah holding me tightly as we both laugh at something off camera. She's wearing a bright yellow sundress, and I'm in overalls. In the background, there is an elementary school. My mother was a kindergarten teacher. I didn't find out that secret until years later. My father never spoke about her. When I was 12 and found that photo in the attic, I asked him if Mom was a teacher. He took one look, turned away, and said that was a long time ago, Isabel. It was just a school. He never mentioned it again. 3 months after my father remarried, that photo vanished from his desk. I eventually found it in the garage in a box marked donations. I hid it away, and he never asked where it went. Victoria came into our lives 6 months after the funeral. My father introduced her by saying she was here to help us heal. But when I was 5, I overheard Victoria telling him in the kitchen that I looked too much like Sarah. Every time you look at her, you remember what you lost, she whispered. It isn't healthy for anyone. Garrett is your fresh start. Garrett wasn't even born yet. But he was already the chosen fresh start, while I was the painful reminder of a past they wanted to forget. 2 weeks later, my bedroom was moved to the dark little space at the end of the hall because they said the larger room was needed for a nursery. Once Garrett arrived, the entire house revolved around him. My father, who had been cold and grieving for a year, suddenly came alive. He carried Garrett everywhere, took endless photos, and called relatives. I watched from the hallway, trying to figure out why this baby got the warm, loving father I had never known. By the time I was 7, I stopped calling him Dad. The word felt wrong, like a title that only belonged to Garrett. I started calling him Dr. Wheeler, just like his students did, and he never corrected me. The division became permanent when I chose my college major. I went to his office while he was grading papers and told him I wanted to study elementary education to become a teacher. Elementary education, he said, without even looking up. Yes, that is what you want to do with your degree. Teach small children. Yes, finally, he looked at me, his eyes full of disappointment. Sarah would have expected more from you. The words felt like a physical blow. He never talked about my mother, but now he was using her memory to shame me. Mom was a kindergarten teacher, I said quietly. He blinked. What? Before she married you, she taught at an elementary school. I found her resume in the attic. His face hardened, then returned to that cold academic detachment. That was different, he said. She had other opportunities. She chose to teach, to give back to the community. You are choosing it because it is easy. Teaching isn't easy, I argued. Compared to what Garrett is doing, it is, he said. Garrett was doing pre-law at Yale, already building a track toward high-profile firms. I walked out of his office that day and stopped looking for his approval. I chose teaching for Sarah, for the woman in the yellow dress smiling outside the school. My father forgot her career, but I didn't. I wasn't his daughter anymore. I was his mistake. A week before the gala, the exclusion became completely systematic. Garrett asked me to get coffee 3 days before the event, which almost never happens. We sat at a cafe near campus. Big day on Saturday, I said. Yeah, Dad is incredibly excited. Garrett replied, staring at his phone with a smug smile. What's funny? Oh, nothing, he said, turning the phone slightly. But I caught the name of the group chat at the top of the screen. Retirement Gala Core Group. It had 47 unread messages. I wasn't in that group. Garrett noticed I saw it and quickly locked his screen with an awkward laugh. Oh, that's just boring logistics stuff. Seating arrangements, catering, the schedule. I didn't know there was a group chat, I said. Well, Victoria wanted to keep the planning efficient. You know how she is. I did know. Her efficiency meant absolute control, ensuring I was completely left out of the loop. What kind of logistics? I asked. Just who sits where and when people speak. Actually, I think I saw your name on the list for table 18 or something. But Victoria is handling the details. He shifted uncomfortably. By the way, Dad has a massive announcement that night. I need to get ready for it. What announcement, Garrett? His phone rang, and he grabbed it like a lifeline. Sorry, I have a client call from the firm. See you Saturday. I sat there looking at my cooling tea. They had a group chat. They were planning something I knew nothing about. That night, Victoria called again. Isabel, I'm just finalizing the last details. By the way, your husband Daniel, right? What does he do again? Something with computers. You know his name. Victoria, I said, controlling my anger. He does software consulting. Oh, how nice. Is he comfortable with formal events? I'm only asking because there will be a lot of university leadership, trustees, and government officials. I wouldn't want him to feel overwhelmed. Translation: I don't want your average husband ruining my high-class social circle. Daniel will be fine, I said coldly. I'm sure he will. And what about you, dear? What are you wearing? I hope you have a proper dress. Black tie doesn't just mean any casual black dress, you understand? There will be media photographers. I have a dress, Victoria. Wonderful. I'm sure you'll both find the night very educational. She said educational like it was a private joke. When I hung up, my hands were shaking. Daniel sat on the couch, watching me quietly. What did she say? He asked. Garrett is at table 3, and we are somewhere out of sight. Daniel's jaw tightened. Only I knew that look meant he felt every insult they threw at me. Do you want me there with you? He asked, his voice steady and grounding. Yes, I said. I need you there. Then I will absolutely be there, he replied, holding my hand. Later that night, I heard him back in his office on another call, his voice low and intense. Confirm the board structure, he was saying. Who has the final say on decisions? Focus on Dr. Brennan. Yes. I need the details tonight. Saturday finally arrived. We drove down to the Belmont Hotel. The valet took our keys, and as we walked toward the entrance, the scale of it hit me. A long red carpet lined the front of the hotel with flashbulbs going off constantly. A massive backdrop read, Celebrating Dr. Jonathan Wheeler 35 Years of Excellence. This wasn't just a retirement dinner. It was a coronation. A photographer at the door stopped us. Name, please? Isabel Wheeler. He scrolled down his clipboard, frowned, and checked again. I don't see you on the VIP list, he said. Are you on the general guest list? A hot blush crept up my neck as people in line behind us watched. I'm his daughter. Oh, all right, let me see. He flipped to the very last page and found a handwritten name scribbled in the bottom corner. Here it is. Isabel Wheeler, General Seating. General Seating. At my own father's retirement, his daughter was General Seating. The photographer waved us through without offering to take a photo. Clearly, that was reserved for the VIPs. Daniel's jaw set again, and I felt his hand on the small of my back, solid and warm. Keep moving, he whispered. We walked into the main hall and saw a huge seating chart with elegant gold borders. Tables 1 through 8 were clearly marked University Board and Distinguished Guests. I looked down past the presidents, donors, and deans. Table 18. My name was at Table 18, not even printed on the official chart, but added in different handwriting at the bottom. A woman next to me glanced at it and snickered. Oh dear, that's all the way in the back by the kitchen. Are you someone's assistant? No, I said flatly. I'm his daughter. Her smile vanished. Oh, I didn't know he had another child. Most people don't, I said, walking right past her. To get to table 18, we had to walk through the entire ballroom. We passed table 1, where Dr. Brennan was talking with the trustees. We passed table 2, filled with philanthropists whose names were on university buildings. We passed table 3. My father, Victoria, and Garrett were sitting there. My father's eyes met mine for half a second before sliding away, as if looking at a blank wall. Victoria gave a cold, victorious smile. Garrett looked slightly uncomfortable, but didn't stand up to greet us. Around us, people whispered. Is that his daughter from his first marriage? I heard she's just a regular school teacher. Wow, table 18? That's pretty harsh. Table 18 really was right next to the kitchen door. There were no beautiful floral centerpieces here, no candles, and the chairs weren't even the elegant ones used for the rest of the room, just cheap folding chairs. The others at the table were family members of the event staff, administrative assistants, and the wife of a maintenance supervisor. There was no name card at my setting. A waiter walked over looking confused. Ma'am, this table is supposed to be overflow for staff guests. Are you sure you're in the right spot? I'm sure, I said. I'm sitting here. I took my seat on the nameless chair with Daniel beside me. Do you want me to print a card for you? The waiter asked. No, thank you, I replied. It wasn't fine at all. But what was I supposed to say? That my father's wife intentionally left me out? That as a Wheeler, I had to eat my dinner listening to the sound of crashing dishes and the kitchen staff shouting. Daniel leaned close, his voice barely a whisper. Isabel, no matter what happens tonight, trust me. I turned to look at him. His expression was as calm as water, but his eyes carried a sharp intensity I had never seen before. What are you going to do? I whispered. What I have to do, he replied. Before I could ask anything else, the house lights dimmed, and the ceremony began. The room went completely dark, except for bright spotlights, aimed directly at the podium at the front of the grand ballroom. The chatter died down instantly, leaving only the faint clinking of dishes from the kitchen door behind us, which felt incredibly loud in the sudden silence. Dr. Howard Brennan, the chairman of the university board, walked up to the stage. His silver hair caught the light perfectly, and his tailored suit gave him the commanding presence of an old-school New England leader. Ladies and gentlemen, Brennan's voice boomed through the high-end sound system, echoing through the massive room with authority. Tonight, we gather to honor a true giant in education. For 35 years, Dr. Jonathan Wheeler has not only shaped thousands of students, but through his extraordinary vision, he has elevated this university's academic standing to unprecedented heights. Applause rolled through the room, polite but loud. Sitting at dark table 18, I watched my father nod with practiced humility, the exact look he used whenever he wanted to appear modest. Jonathan's work didn't stop in the classroom. Brennan continued, his tone turning serious. He secured over $18 million in educational grants and built deep partnerships with the country's top philanthropic organizations. As he always says, education isn't just about knowledge, it's about legacy. I felt Daniel's hand rest gently over mine, his warmth grounding me in the freezing room. He wasn't looking at the stage. His eyes were downcast, as if reviewing an invisible plan in his mind. Now, Brennan turned and pointed toward table 3. Please join me in welcoming the man of the evening, Dr. Jonathan Wheeler. My father stood up, adjusting the button on his tuxedo. Victoria whispered something in his ear, bringing out his first genuine smile of the night. He patted Garrett on the shoulder and walked up the steps. Standing behind the heavy podium, he took a moment to look out at the room, letting his eyes linger on the wealthy alumni and donors. He lived for moments like this, moments where he was treated like a god. Thank you, Howard, and thank you all, my father began, his voice completely steady. 35 years ago, when I first stepped into a classroom here, I brought a core belief with me. True education is built on the standard of excellence. The world has plenty of followers. What it needs are leaders. That is what I call a legacy. Not just leaving a name behind, but leaving a strict standard that demands the best. A wave of understanding laughter rippled through the audience. That kind of elite worldview always went over well in rooms like this, and that standard applies not just to my academic career, but to my family as well. My stomach dropped. The massive projector screen, behind the podium, lit up with a photo of Garrett in his master's gown from Yale Law School. My father standing beside him with a massive smile, against a backdrop of historic brick walls. This is my son, Garrett, my father said, his voice filled with a warmth and pride he had never shown me. He graduated in the top 15% of his class at Yale and passed the bar exam on his very first attempt. In Garrett, I see the absolute realization of the excellence I've spent my life pursuing. The screen kept scrolling through photos. Garrett in a top-tier law office. Garrett speaking at a seminar in Washington. Garrett posing with politicians. Every single image was professionally lit and perfectly polished. For the next 5 minutes, my father went through his career, and every single milestone ended with a story about how Garrett carried on his spirit. Sitting in the corner, I felt like I couldn't breathe. In a presentation that lasted over 10 minutes, I was completely absent. He had physically erased me from his life history, right in front of 230 high society guests. No childhood photos, No college graduation pictures, not even a single family portrait. At table 3, Victoria took a slow sip of her champagne, her eyes reflecting the bright lights. She had won. It took her 26 years, but she had finally pushed the inconvenient piece entirely out of the Wheeler family picture. Building a legacy means making incredibly difficult choices. My father's voice grew louder and more formal, signaling a major transition. It means recognizing that not every path leads to the same destination. Some children understand the weight of a legacy and choose to meet the challenge, while others choose a simpler, more comfortable life, which is their right. But a legacy belongs only to those who can carry its weight. I bit my lip hard, tasting iron. The guests around us began to whisper, and even though no one looked directly at table 18, I could feel the pitying glances cutting across. So, the most important matter tonight concerns the future. My father paused, holding the room's absolute attention. Over the past 2 years, I have worked closely with the Board of Trustees to establish a permanent framework to ensure my educational philosophy continues. Tonight, I am officially establishing the Wheeler Education Legacy Endowment. The screen flashed a bright number, $6.2 million. A collective gasp went through the crowd. An individual endowment of that size was incredibly rare in academia, usually requiring massive corporate backing or deep institutional resources. This fund will be used exclusively to support future scholars who demonstrate academic excellence and leadership, my father continued. And the committee managing this endowment must be composed of those who truly understand its purpose. Therefore, I am appointing Garrett Wheeler as the lifetime trustee of the foundation, effective immediately. Garrett stood up under the spotlight, bowing to the room as deafening applause broke out. This was the ultimate victory. It wasn't just about the money. It was a permanent stamp of legitimacy. Garrett was officially the sole heir to the Wheeler name, crowned in front of the entire community. My father raised his glass high. Finally, I want to leave every parent in this room with one thought, he said, looking straight ahead as if taking an oath. This has been the guiding principle of my life. Please raise your glasses, for the future, and for the university. More than 200 people stood up, the sound of crystal clinking filling the air. Because my father paused for a second, his eyes cutting through the bright lights to find me exactly where I sat in the darkness. At table 18, his voice coming through the speakers clearly and brutally into every corner of the room. Only the children who make us proud truly belong to us. The room erupted. Cheers and applause filled the space, a celebration of a successful father honoring his perfect heir. I sat on my folding chair, feeling completely frozen, like standing entirely exposed in a blizzard while everyone around me cheered for the snow. As the applause slowly died down, my father didn't put down the microphone. It seemed he wanted to take the exclusion one step further, to clear the room of the only detail that didn't fit. Isabel, he called out. Every head in the room turned toward the back, expensive suits and gowns shifting as people tried to find who he was talking about. Within seconds, the photographer's camera found me sitting right by the kitchen entrance. You can leave now. 4 words, completely flat, without a single shred of emotion. It was the tone you would use to dismiss a stranger who wandered into a private meeting. The entire ballroom fell into a heavy, suffocating silence that felt far worse than the noise from before. It felt like all the air had been pulled from the room. In the distance, Victoria smiled slightly and Garrett looked down, adjusting his gold cufflinks. I stood up slowly, my legs shaking underneath my dress, forcing myself to stand straight. I refused to break down in front of them. But just as I turned toward the service door, Daniel stood up right next to me. He moved deliberately, with a calm presence that commanded attention. He didn't look at me or the exit. He locked his eyes directly on Jonathan Wheeler on the stage. "Dr. Wheeler," Daniel said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried an incredible weight that seemed to catch the microphone frequencies, amplifying his words across the high ceilings of the ballroom. My father frowned, squinting to see the man standing in the furthest corner of the room. "Who are you?" he asked. "This is a private dinner." "I'm Daniel Chen," Daniel said, pushing his chair back and stepping out from behind table 18. "I'm Isabel's husband. And before anyone leaves tonight, I think there are a few legal and contractual details we need to clarify publicly." "Sit down, young man," Dr. Brennan warned from the stage, his tone laced with irritation. "This is not the time or place for inappropriate outbursts." Daniel ignored him completely. He took a step forward, walking directly down the center aisle of the ballroom. It was the main corridor of power. With every step he took, the sound of his leather dress shoes clicked sharply against the marble floor. 23 steps. I counted them subconsciously. Under the gaze of 230 members of the social elite, this man, whom they had dismissed as a mere tech guy or ordinary middle-class outsider, walked straight up to the podium. My father's face shifted from pure contempt to open anger. "Security? Please escort this gentleman out." Daniel had already stepped up onto the stage. He didn't stop. He walked right past my father, slightly blocking his light, pulled out the phone I had seen so many times before, and looked calmly down at Dr. Brennan. "Dr. Brennan, as the chairman of the Westbridge University Board, I believe you should take a look at this first," Daniel said, handing over the phone. "This is a draft of an email I was planning to send to your legal department on Monday morning. But since Dr. Wheeler brought up legacies and pride tonight, I think right now is the perfect moment for these legal terms to take effect." Brennan hesitated for a second before reaching out to take the phone. The entire room fell dead silent. I watched Brennan's eyes scan the screen. Within 3 seconds, his weathered, sophisticated face went completely pale. His hands began to tremble. He snapped his head up, glanced at my father, and then looked back at Daniel with a mixture of shock and profound respect. "Jonathan," Brennan's voice was so dry it was barely audible. "What is it, Howard?" my father asked, realizing something was wrong. He reached out to grab the phone. "This is just the nonsense of a crazy person." Brennan forcefully pushed my father's hand away. His voice shook as it blared through the microphone across the entire hall. "Jonathan, shut up! Shut up right now!" Daniel stepped forward and calmly took his phone back. Without giving a single glance to my father, who was already unraveling, He turned to face the entire room, facing all the wealthy elites who had just been laughing at me and looking down on me. He reached out and gave a smooth swipe on the iPad, controlling the main projector. The title for the Wheeler Education Legacy Endowment vanished from the screen instantly. In its place appeared a massive official header bearing a deep blue shield logo. It was the legal authorization document from the EduBridge Foundation. I assume many of you are familiar with this name. Daniel's voice remained steady, but it now carried the weight of an absolute judgment. Over the past 6 years, the EduBridge Foundation has provided 40% of Westbridge University's research funding and 55% of all financial aid scholarships. A total of $18 million. Audible gasps echoed through the room. Several board members stood straight up. "I am Daniel Chen," Daniel announced calmly. "I am the founder and current CEO of the EduBridge Foundation." He turned his head to look at my father, whose face had twisted into a pale, broken mask of pure shock. "Dr. Wheeler, you just said that only the children who make you proud truly belong to you. So now let's talk about who this endowment actually belongs to under our donation agreement." A suffocating silence filled the room, so absolute that even the faint hum of the air conditioning sounded loud. Dr. Jonathan Wheeler's fingers gripped the edge of the podium so hard, his knuckles turned a sickly white. He looked at the son-in-law he had completely dismissed. His eyes filled not just with shock, but with the total terror of watching his reality crumble. "This is impossible!" Victoria cried out from table 3, her elegant mask completely shattering. She bolted upright, spilling champagne all over her expensive designer dress without even noticing. "Daniel Chen? The quiet guy who just drinks tea and fixes computers? No, this has to be a sick joke." "This is no joke, Mrs. Wheeler," Daniel said, turning his head slightly, not even looking at her fully as he kept his eyes on my father. "This is a serious conversation about contractual integrity." Dr. Brennan, the most powerful man at Westbridge University, was frantically scrolling through the phone, sweat breaking out across his forehead. He knew all about the EduBridge Foundation, the educational funding giant with massive influence, from Boston to Silicon Valley. He had just never connected the legendary, low-profile founder Mr. Chen to the young man standing on the stage. "Mr. Chen," Brennan spoke, his tone shifting into a cautious, almost submissive register. "I'm sure there must be some sort of misunderstanding here. Jonathan, why didn't you ever mention?" "Because he never cared to look." Daniel cut Brennan off, his voice smooth as water but freezing cold. He didn't care who sat next to his daughter, or who that man was, as long as it didn't add to his personal glory. In his eyes, Isabel's life, just like her husband, was nothing more than a mediocre accessory to be thrown away. Daniel turned back to the audience and swiped to the next page on the iPad. A bolded legal clause appeared on the screen. Westbridge University and EduBridge Foundation. Strategic Partnership Agreement. Chapter 8, Section 4. Trustee Qualification Restrictions. According to the latest donation renewal, signed between us and Westbridge University in 2023. Daniel's voice rang through the hall. Any educational fund established through our financing must require its board members to meet strict requirements. A minimum of 5 years of frontline teaching experience and a documented record of service in high-need Title I schools. This is a strict measure to prevent academic corruption and bureaucratic posturing, ensuring every dollar goes to those who actually understand education. He paused, his sharp gaze locking onto Garrett. Mr. Garrett Wheeler, Daniel called him out by name, an Ivy League law graduate and a first-year associate at a corporate law firm. Your resume is highly polished. But let me ask you, do you have even a single day of experience teaching in a K-12 classroom? Have you ever graded papers for children facing poverty in Boston's toughest neighborhoods? Do you have the slightest idea how to support a third grader with a reading disability? Garrett stood there with his mouth open, his face turning a deep, burning red. He looked to his father for help, but Jonathan was completely paralyzed. You don't. Your background is purely elite, and your career is entirely built on corporate wealth. You do not meet these requirements, Daniel stated coldly. Therefore, the appointment Dr. Wheeler just announced constitutes a material breach of our donation agreement. This is just a minor detail. We can resolve this legally after the event. My father attempted to reclaim the microphone, his voice turning raspy and desperate. No, it is not a minor detail. Daniel's voice rose significantly, showing his anger for the first time all evening. This is about fundamental fairness. When you stand up here in front of 230 people and say only the children who make us proud truly belong to us, you aren't just insulting your daughter. You are insulting the entire purpose of education itself. Daniel swiped the screen again, and a resume appeared for everyone to see. Let's look at another resume. Isabel Wheeler. 8 years of teaching at Riverside Elementary, a classic Title I school where 85% of the students come from low-income families. She has been nominated for Teacher of the Year 3 times consecutively, and the reading program she developed personally raised student literacy rates by 30%. She raised $150,000 in donations in her spare time to rebuild the school library. Her background aligns perfectly with every single term in Section 8. Standing by Table 18, tears finally broke past my eyes. I never imagined that my quiet days, the late nights spent fixing up old coats for my students, or grading papers under a dim lamp would ever be displayed so proudly, in a room like this, by someone who loved me. The ballroom broke out into frantic whispering. The tides had completely turned. The elites who had looked down on me moments ago were now staring at me as if I were hidden royalty. Some of them even pulled out their phones, looking up Riverside Elementary and my name. Dr. Wheeler, Daniel said, looking straight at my father, causing the older man to take a step back. You just told Isabel to leave. So now, as the representative of your largest financial supporter, I am officially informing you. If Garrett's appointment is not rescinded immediately, the EduBridge Foundation will trigger an immediate defunding process under Section 12, Clause 3. That doesn't just mean the $6.2 million tonight. It includes the $18 million currently funding Westbridge's active operations. Dr. Brennan looked as if he might faint. He spun around to my father, his voice shaking with furious panic. Jonathan, You utter fool! Look at what you've done! Howard, listen to me. No! Don't say another word. Brennan yelled directly into the microphone. The Westbridge University Board will not allow a breach of this scale. Effective immediately, I declare the nomination of Garrett Wheeler void. This dinner is concluded. The room descended into absolute chaos. A dignified retirement gala had instantly turned into a public stripping of power. Wait, Daniel said, not letting them off the hook just yet. Tonight's events have already spread to the public through the social media accounts of the guests in this room. I believe Dr. Wheeler still has one more important task to complete. He looked back at me, his icy expression instantly melting into pure warmth. You owe Isabel an apology. A public, honest apology. Not for the money, but for your total failure as a father. I watched my father stand behind the podium, the bright lights casting harsh shadows over every single wrinkle on his face, exposing his utter humiliation. He had spent his entire life chasing status and admiration. Now, his carefully built empire had completely collapsed in front of the daughter and son-in-law he despised the most. Victoria ran onto the stage, trying to pull him away. Let's go, Jonathan. Don't listen to him. We can hire corporate lawyers. Hire lawyers? Daniel let out a cold laugh. Mrs. Wheeler, I think you should check the latest headlines. Given your questionable use of university resources to back personal funds during the planning phases, the State Attorney General's office may already be looking into your financial dealings. Victoria's face went completely bloodless, and her hand slipped weakly off my father's arm. My father looked at me. For the first time in 26 years, he actually looked at me. The disgust was entirely gone, replaced by the desperate pleading of a man who had lost everything. Isabel? He whispered, his voice trembling. I took a deep breath. I thought I would feel a rush of vindication, but all I felt inside was a deep, profound peace. The kind of freedom that only comes when you finally let go of the past completely. No thank you, Doctor. Wheeler, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the microphone near Daniel. Like you said, only the children who make you proud truly belong to you. And right now, I only belong to the people who make me proud. That isn't you. I turned and looked at Daniel. He walked down from the stage and reached out his hand to take mine. In that moment, someone among the guests started clapping. The applause started small, then spread instantly through the room, turning into a deafening cheer. It wasn't for the legendary Dr. Jonathan Wheeler. It was for the elementary school teacher from Table 18, who refused to break. We walked out of the ballroom side by side. Passing Table 3, I saw Garrett slumped in his chair, his expensive designer suit stained with spilled wine, looking completely broken. I didn't stop, and I didn't look back. As we stepped out by the Belmont Hotel, a light Boston rain was falling. The cool air filled my lungs, making me feel incredibly light. When did you put all this together? I asked Daniel as we got into the car, and he started the engine. The exact moment I found out your father intentionally left your name off the family lists, Daniel said calmly, his hands steady on the steering wheel. I will never let anyone treat you like an afterthought, Isabel. Not even your own father. I leaned back against the seat, watching the city lights flash by. I knew my life would change completely starting tomorrow. But I also knew I would still show up on time for my class at Riverside Elementary. I would still work through spelling errors with my students, and I would still celebrate every small victory. Because that is what a real legacy looks like. Not a number written in a trust fund, but real hope planted in the hearts of others. 3 months later, a news alert popped up on my phone. Former Westbridge University Department Head Jonathan Wheeler declares bankruptcy amid administrative penalties. Because the video from the gala had gone viral across social media, public pressure had forced the university to conduct a full audit of his accounts over the past decade. Victoria filed for divorce the month after the scandal broke, taking what little legal assets were left and moving out of state. Garrett was let go from his law firm due to the fallout and was now doing basic paperwork for a small legal consulting group. Meanwhile, with Daniel's help, I established a brand new foundation. We named it the Sarah Wheeler Memorial Fund. We didn't place the office in a corporate high-rise downtown. We set it up in an old building, right next to Riverside Elementary. Today was my mother's birthday. I stood by the office window, watching the kids run around the playground downstairs. Daniel walked up behind me, wrapping his arms around me gently and resting his chin on my shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "I'm thinking about the photo," I said, pointing to the frame on my desk, showing Sarah in her yellow dress, holding me in my overalls. I think she'd be smiling right now. Just then, my phone rang with an unknown number. I picked it up. "Isabel?" It was my father's voice. He sounded decades older, all his old authority completely gone, replaced by a frail, hesitant tone. I found some things your mother left behind. Some of her old lesson plans, and a few undeveloped film rolls. I thought, maybe you'd want them. I stayed silent for a long moment, listening to his heavy breathing on the other end. "You can mail them to the foundation's address," I said calmly, feeling no anger left inside me. "But I have to go, Dad. I have a class to teach this afternoon." I understand, he whispered, his voice cracking. "Isabel, I just wanted to say, I'm really proud of you." I held the phone, looking out at the sun shining down on the playground as the kids cheered around a new slide. "Thank you," I said, my tone polite but distant. "But that doesn't matter anymore. I've learned how to be proud of myself." I hung up the phone. Daniel looked at me and smiled. "Ready, Mrs. Chen? The kids are waiting for you." I picked up my lesson plans and took Daniel's hand. "Let's go. Let's go build a legacy of our own." That is my story. A story about being erased, being cast aside, and finally rewriting my life with the strength of real support. On that rainy night in Boston, I thought I had lost everything. But the truth is, I had finally thrown away a name card that never belonged to me and found out exactly who I was meant to be. That Sunday, I called Ruth just like I did every week. Her voice sounded fragile, but the moment she recognized me, she became incredibly sharp. "Marian, come up to the lake next weekend," she said. "Just you, and don't tell your mother." That was where it all began. I drove out to the house, and the moment I walked in, I was greeted by the familiar scent of wood smoke and the lavender soap she had used for half her life. Ruth had lost a lot of weight, but her eyes were as piercing as ever. We played cards, and she beat me 3 games in a row, laughing with the pure joy of a kid pulling a prank. Then, during that long, clear afternoon, she laid her hand down. "Marian," she said, taking my hand. Her skin felt as thin as old parchment. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me, not just polite." I nodded. "All these years, how have your parents made you feel? Tell me the truth." Maybe it was because I knew she was leaving soon, or maybe because no one had ever bothered to ask. But 30 years of pent-up hurt came pouring out. I told her that I always felt like an old coat someone threw behind the door and forgot about. I told her about the photos, the driving lessons I never got, and every single dollar I spent on therapy, trying to fix myself. Ruth listened, tears running down her face, but her voice was absolutely steady. "You have never been the problem, Marian," she said, giving me the words that changed everything. "I think I know why they did this. I've suspected it for a long time, but I didn't have proof, and I didn't want to break this family apart without it." She squeezed my hand tighter. "I've taken care of it. When I'm gone, Howard Hale will contact you. Not your mother, you. He has something to give you, and you must open it completely alone." She kissed my forehead one last time. "No matter what is inside, remember you will always be my child." On a Tuesday in April, Ruth passed away peacefully in her sleep. Sitting on her nightstand was the postcard I had sent her the week before. The funeral took place on a freezing morning. In the church, my mother received condolences like royalty, with Brooke standing right beside her in a perfectly tailored black dress. That was when Howard Hale found me. He was an older gentleman with kind, tired eyes. "Miss Vance," he whispered. "Marian, your grandmother left very specific instructions. Come to my office this Thursday, before the official family reading of the will." Across the room, I could feel my mother's gaze cutting into the back of my neck. Thursday afternoon, Howard's office smelled of old paper and fresh coffee. He had me sit down and crossed his hands. "Your grandmother updated her will last October," he explained. "She did it right here with 2 witnesses and a full mental evaluation. I recommended it because I anticipated your family might contest it." He paused and slid a thick envelope across the desk. In the corner was the return address for a biological laboratory in Arizona. "The Donovan property and the family trust will not be inherited the way your parents think," Howard said, his voice entirely calm. Ruth added a precondition: the beneficiary must be her direct biological descendant, and she demanded scientific verification. My palms started to sweat. "She ordered this test herself last September," Howard said, pointing to the envelope. "A grand maternal DNA report. She provided her own sample along with 2 others. She strictly instructed me to give this to you before your mother could see it. She said, 'You deserve to be the first person on earth to know the truth.'" I asked him whose the other 2 samples were. My voice trembling. "Yours, and your sister Brooke's," he replied. A sudden wave of dizziness hit me. For 30 years I believed I was the broken one. Now, my grandmother was reaching out to tell me that maybe the flaw never belonged to me. I opened the envelope. The report was 4 pages long, filled with complex lab terminology, but on the very first page was a clear summary. I had to read it 3 times before the words stopped moving in front of my eyes. The maternal analysis was definitive. The markers for sample A, belonging to me, matched Ruth perfectly, showing a 99.9% probability of a direct biological relationship. But sample B, belonging to Brooke, did not match at all. The report completely excluded Brooke from having any biological relationship to Ruth through my mother. The meaning was undeniable. Brooke, the oldest daughter, the favorite, the one my mother treated as the pride of the family, had no biological connection to Ruth whatsoever. And I, the one who supposedly never belonged, was the only blood relative Ruth had left in the world. I looked up at Howard. "Does my mother know about this?" "No," Howard said. "No one knows." Ruth's instruction was clear. "The choice is entirely yours. You decide when and how to bring this to light." Sitting in that quiet office, holding the paper that completely rewrote my life, I finally understood. The exclusion at the dinner table was never because I wasn't good enough. It was because Brooke wasn't biological. And my entire existence was a living threat to the secret my mother had been hiding for over 30 years. When I walked out of Howard's office, a light rain was falling over the city. I sat in my old Toyota, letting the drops hit the windshield while the clock on the dashboard ticked away. My legal training kicked in. Documents don't lie, but people will create 1,000 stories to cover a single deception. I didn't go home immediately, and I didn't call anyone. I went back to my apartment and opened my laptop. I needed to verify everything before making a move. I checked the laboratory's credentials. It held a full national certification, meaning these results would hold up in any court. Ruth hadn't relied on a cheap retail test. She had handed me a legal hammer ready to bring down the house. Next, I pieced together the family timeline. Brooke was born in the spring of 1990. I followed in the late spring of 1992. The family narrative was a picture-perfect standard. A young couple with 2 daughters 2 years apart. My mother always claimed that Brooke's birth nearly took her life, leaving her weak for 2 years, which explained the gap before I arrived. I had never questioned it, but looking at the legal timeline, the story cracked. I called my Aunt Deanna, my mother's youngest sister, and the only one who ever showed me real kindness. I told her I was organizing some of Ruth's old records and needed to verify a few dates. "Oh, those were strange years," Deanna sighed over the phone. "Your parents wanted children so badly, but nothing worked for years." Patricia was completely devastated. Then, like a miracle, Brooke arrived. "Your grandmother always called it a blessing." My hand shook against the phone. "Do you remember the details around when Brooke was born?" I asked. "Well, Patricia went out west that spring to Arizona, supposedly to rest and carry the pregnancy safely," Deanna said. "Glenn had family out there. 3 months later, they came back with Brooke. People didn't ask many questions back then. We were just happy the baby was here." "She went out west for the entire spring and just brought a baby back?" "Yes, dear. Why do you ask?" I made an excuse and hung up, my heart pounding. In the early 90s, private adoption processes in Arizona were incredibly flexible. A wealthy woman, desperate for a child, goes away to rest and returns with an infant. It was a classic scenario, and it had worked for 34 years. But why the cruelty toward me? I called Deanna back and asked a more direct question. If Brooke was such a miracle, why did the atmosphere in the house get worse when I was born 2 years later? The line went completely silent. After a long pause, Deanna spoke softly. Because you were the proof, Marion. When they adopted Brooke, they convinced everyone, including themselves, that Patricia couldn't have children. Then, 2 years later, you arrived out of nowhere. You became the living evidence of the cover-up. Every time Patricia looked at you, she didn't see a daughter. She saw the failure of her perfect story. Brooke was the narrative she chose, and you were the truth she couldn't erase. I sat on my kitchen floor as the reality settled in. I wasn't pushed to the end of the table because I was difficult or inadequate. I was pushed away because every breath I took reminded my mother that her perfect miracle was built on a lie. I stayed up all night going through the records. In the box of old letters Ruth left me, I found a certified piece of mail from 1990 sent from Arizona. It was written by my mother to Ruth. It never used the word adoption, but one sentence stood out clearly. The agency wants the final signatures before the court hearing. Glenn and I have decided she will never know the truth. Please keep this quiet, Mom. If this ever gets out, it will ruin her life. Ruth kept that letter for over 3 decades. She watched me grow up in the shadows while Brooke was favored based on a fiction. She held on to it until she knew her time was short, choosing to place the truth in the hands of the person who had carried the burden. Over the next 2 weeks, the house was a whirlwind of activity. My mother sent endless demands in the family group chat, organizing a massive family gathering for that Saturday. They thought it was going to be Brooke's coronation. Marion, remember to be a team player. My mother told me over the phone in her usual dismissive tone. I know we've had our issues, but family comes first. Brooke is already stressed planning her anniversary trip, so don't bring up anything negative. We want to ensure Ruth's wishes are handled with dignity. Dignity, I thought, looking in the mirror with a cold smile. Don't worry, Mom. I'll make sure her wishes are handled with absolute precision. The weekend before the meeting, I drove out to the lake house alone. Howard had given me the keys. The furniture was covered in white sheets, and the rooms felt cold, but the familiar scent was there. I walked down to the pier my grandfather had built, the wood creaking under my boots. In the drawer of the card table on the deck, I found a photo tucked under an old deck of cards. It was an 11-year-old version of me, standing on the pier, holding up a small fish with a massive grin. Ruth had taken it. On the back, in her sharp handwriting, it read, Marion, the one who observes, the one who stays the course. You aren't difficult or distant. You are just the one who refuses to live in an illusion. In that moment, the anxiety disappeared. I wasn't looking for revenge. I was simply going to close the door on 34 years of an unearned burden. Saturday morning, I arrived at the estate in New Albany 10 minutes early. My mother was in the kitchen, dressed in her sharp navy dress, arranging deviled eggs on a platter, her standard presentation for important guests. Marion, you're early, she said without looking up. Go get the napkins from the drawer and set them out. Hurry up. I didn't move toward the drawer. Instead, I took a sealed envelope out of my folder and placed it flat on the marble counter right next to the eggs. Mom, before everyone else gets here, I think we need to talk about this, I said evenly. Patricia stopped completely. She glanced down at the envelope, and the moment she saw the logo of the Arizona laboratory, in the corner, her pupils narrowed instantly. It was the look of someone who had guarded a closed door for 30 years, suddenly watching the lock break. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, she said, quickly recovering her cold demeanor. Today is about honoring your grandmother, not a cry for attention. Put your papers away. Grandma ordered this test last September, I said, looking her in the eye. She used your hairbrush and my old bandages. Mom, as your biological daughter, I'm giving you one last chance. Do you want to tell everyone the truth at the table, or should I? Patricia spun around, her face turning from pale to a dark, furious red. You ungrateful child, she hissed, her voice a sharp whisper. We gave you everything, and you bring this manufactured garbage to ruin your sister's day? You're just jealous. You've been jealous of her your entire life. It isn't manufactured, I replied calmly. Howard Hale has the original documentation. And Mom, I found the 1990 letter you sent, the one mentioning the agency and the need for secrecy. Her hands began to shake as she reached for the envelope, but I pulled it back into my folder just as the doorbell rang. The first relatives had arrived. Patricia took a deep breath, instantly putting her polished social face back on. As she walked past me to answer the door, she muttered under her breath, You wouldn't dare. I watched her walk away, thinking to myself, Mom, you spent 30 years teaching me to stand entirely on my own, without needing anyone's validation. Did you really think I would back down now for a relationship that never existed? The house filled up quickly. Brooke arrived with her husband, perfectly bright and animated as always. She came over to hug me, whispering that I had been so distant lately and that we needed to catch up. Looking at her face, which carried none of the Vance family traits, I felt a strange mix of emotions. She was a victim of the story too, kept in a golden bubble built on an absolute fiction. My father was pouring drinks while Deanna sat quietly in the corner, looking serious. Howard Hale sat silently at the end of the long dining table, his briefcase resting beside him. Lunch was a tense performance. My mother spoke at length about how much Ruth adored the family, specifically focusing on her special bond with Brooke. When coffee was served, my father tapped his glass. All right, he said with a confident smile, looking at Howard. I think we all know how Ruth wanted her estate handled. Howard, you can begin the paperwork so Brooke can focus on her travel plans. Howard slowly opened his briefcase. He didn't look at my father, he looked directly at me. Actually, Glenn, Howard's voice was old but clear, Ruth revised her will last October. She added a very specific, absolute condition. The room went entirely cold. My mother's knuckles turned white around her cup. Because the estate involves the core family trust, Ruth required the beneficiary to verify their direct biological lineage through scientific testing. Howard said, laying the documents out on the table one by one. And she left the verification documents in Marion's care. Every eye in the room, shocked, confused, and angry, turned instantly to me at the end of the table. I opened the folder and drew out the report with the clear summary box. "Grandma loved this family," I said, standing up, my voice steadying completely, but she couldn't let it stand on a foundation that everyone was too afraid to question. I looked at Brooke. "Brooke, what I am about to say isn't against you, and it is not your fault." "Marian, be quiet," my mother commanded, slamming her hand down on the table. I didn't stop. I slid the report into the center of the table where everyone could read it. This certified report confirms two things. First, I am Ruth's biological granddaughter, a 99.9% match. I looked past my father's pale face and focused directly on Brooke. Second, Brooke, you have no biological relationship to Ruth or to Patricia Vance. The silence that followed had a weight to it. It was the sound of a 34-year deception falling apart in an instant. In that quiet afternoon, the air seemed to vanish from the room, leaving only the heavy ticking of the old clock on the wall. "This is a lie," my mother shouted, throwing her chair back as she stood up. All her elegant composure was completely gone. "This is fraudulent. Howard, she manipulated you." Marian has always been resentful of Brooke. She was an isolated, difficult child, and now she's trying to tear this family apart for revenge. Her finger shook violently as she pointed at me, her face contorted with panic. "Patricia," Howard said, his voice as calm as ice, "I must remind you that I personally handled this request for Ruth. The chain of custody for the samples is complete and entirely legal. If you question this report, you are questioning my professional standing and your mother's competence. And I have the full evaluations proving Ruth was entirely lucid when she signed these directives." "This can't be true," my father muttered, sinking back into his chair, his usual confidence entirely gone. He knocked his glass over slightly, sending a dark red stain spreading across the white tablecloth. "Except it is completely true, Glenn," a voice said from the corner. Aunt Deanna stood up, looking exhausted from carrying the secret for decades. She looked directly at my mother. "Patricia, enough. I am done keeping this story for you. I am done watching Marian sit at the edge of the table like a stranger every holiday, while you celebrate a miracle you brought home from Arizona. Deanna, shut your mouth," my mother screamed. "I won't be quiet anymore," Deanna said, turning to the rest of the relatives who sat frozen, staring in absolute shock. In the spring of 1990, Patricia was never pregnant. She went to Phoenix to work with a private adoption agency. She and Glenn brought Brooke back and invented the entire story about a difficult delivery to cover it up. They swore they would never tell a soul. "Mom," Brooke finally spoke, her voice faint. The brightness she usually carried had completely vanished as she looked at Patricia with total confusion. "Is what Aunt Deanna's saying true? Am I adopted?" Patricia opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her entire defensive narrative had completely failed. "And look at this, Brooke," I said, sliding the copy of the 1990 letter across the table. "This is Mom's own handwriting to Grandma." She specifically outlines the agency agreement and begs her to keep it quiet because she thought the truth would ruin your life. Brooke's hands shook as she picked up the paper, tears hitting the page immediately. "So," Brooke said, looking up at me with a mixture of shock and deep realization, So Marian is the only biological child in this house. Mom, is that why you were always so harsh to her? Because every time you looked at her, you were reminded of the story you created? My mother had no answer, because any excuse would only confirm her actions. If Brooke was the badge of her pride, I was the living reminder of her choice. Every time I showed traits that belonged to the family, it disrupted the fiction she wanted to believe. She kept me at a distance because she couldn't face the truth. I don't need an apology from you, Mom, I said, realizing the old hurt that had followed me for 30 years had finally vanished completely. I don't need you to validate who I am. Grandma already gave me all the recognition I will ever need. Howard tapped the table, bringing the focus back to the business at hand. According to the terms of the will, since Brooke Vance does not meet the biological requirement, the property and the entire family trust will pass solely to Marian Vance. Everything, my father asked, his focus shifting back to the money. Howard, that isn't right. Even if Brooke isn't biological, we raised her for 30 years, and Marian has always kept her distance from the family. Glenn, Howard said softly. Ruth wrote it explicitly in the text. My life's work does not belong to a fiction. If you want to challenge this in court, you are welcome to try, but I assure you it will only expose this entire matter to the public. There was no dessert that afternoon, and no polite goodbyes. The relatives left quickly, wanting to distance themselves from the situation as fast as possible. The wealthy friends who used to circle my mother couldn't even make eye contact on their way out. The social circle in New Albany was small, and the truth would travel quickly. My father sat with his face in his hands, while Patricia stood at the head of the table, trying to hold on to a dignity that no longer had an audience. Brooke found me in the hallway before I left, looking entirely lost. Marian, she said quietly, her voice hoarse. I am so sorry. I truly didn't know. I always thought you and Mom just didn't get along because of your personality. I never realized everything I was given was taken away from you. Looking at the sister I used to envy, I didn't see a rival anymore. I just saw someone who had been denied the truth of her own identity. It wasn't your fault, Brooke, I told her. In a system built on a deception, no one really wins. If you ever want to spend time at the lake house, just let me know. I'll give you the keys. You're still my sister, if that means anything to you. Brooke blinked back tears and gave me a genuine embrace, the first real hug we had ever shared. 2 weeks later, I drove back out to the property in Michigan. This time, I returned as the owner. The evening sun hit the water like gold leaf. I held a private letter Howard had given me, which Ruth asked me to open only after everything was settled. Sitting on the pier my grandfather built, listening to the birds over the water, I opened it. My dearest Marian, by the time you read this, the noise should have settled. I know uncovering this must have been incredibly difficult, but it was necessary. This isn't about the house or the money. I left these to you because you are the only one who learned how to walk in the shadows and grow strong. Your parents and Brooke lived in a carefully manufactured light, but you built a resilient soul through adversity. Remember, you weren't hard to love because of a flaw in you. You were simply too honest for them to face. Live your life completely on your own terms now. You've sat at the edge of the table long enough. You don't need anyone's permission anymore. The pier is yours, the lake is yours, and your life is finally your own. With all my love, Ruth. I put the letter down as the sun dipped below the horizon. My phone buzzed with a text from Brooke telling me she had packed her things after a massive argument with Patricia and was staying elsewhere. She asked if she could come up to the lake next weekend to learn how to play cards. I texted back a simple yes. In that moment, I realized the immediate satisfaction of seeing the cover-up break was small compared to the peace that followed. The real healing was knowing I never had to compromise myself again for an answer that would never come. I wasn't the awkward girl waiting at the end of the table anymore. I stood up, walked into the house, and sat at the head of the table with a glass of water. There were no expensive porcelain sets, no forced etiquette. Just me, quietness, and the truth. A deception is a heavy burden that turns a home into a constraint, but the truth allows you to move forward completely free. I picked up the deck of cards, shuffled them smoothly, and smiled into the quiet room. We did it, Grandma. This one is ours.